I am starting to get the impression lately that comic book editors might not be just more important than I initially anticipated, but might be a lot more dangerous. And to talk about that is my good friend Aaron Sparrow. He's been a comic book editor at Boom Studios. In fact, he was kind of like the brand manager as far as the Disney books at Boom. So he has a lot of experience as a comic book editor, not only at Boom, but also at Joe Books, and I believe Tokyo Pop as well. But he was kind of managing an entire line, so I thought it would be good to get his perspective on how, maybe editors are affecting the Marvel and DC universes. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing well, Les. Thanks for having me back on.
It feels like maybe there's nobody overlooking these teams, and that's why we're having such tremendous damage done to the X-Men line, specifically at Marvel under Jordan White and his leadership. The amount of influence that Jordan White has over the X-Men is downright dangerous at this point.
Well, I think when you say leadership with Jordan White, you need to do the air quotes because I don't think I've seen any evidence of any sort of leadership there. Even when you read interviews, the best thing that anybody can say about him is he's such a nice guy. And sometimes as an editor, you have to not be the nice guy because you have to direct this line and you have to make it coherent and you have to make it make sense. And anybody who's reading the X-Men books right now knows that it's just a free-for-all of crap. It just seems like everything's a first draft. It seems like nobody ever gets told no on any dumb idea. It just all goes into the books. And so what you need is a strong editor who has a vision for the characters, who understands the lore and knows inherently what these characters are about, because the fans know what these characters are about. The people that read X-Men, people like Doc, who've and me, who've been reading these books forever, can tell you these histories backwards and forwards. And we know when a character is acting out of character because they're so well established from just decades upon decades of material. So when you have an editor in there who's just kind of like a jokester that I just want to be friends with everybody, and everything goes, you get what we got right now with the X-Men books, which is just a complete muddled mess and a disaster.
Just recently in X Lives and Deaths of Wolverine, we essentially have Moira, who's been in the Marvel universe for a very long time, I believe introduced in the 80s, skinning Banshee, who's one of her closest friends, and wearing him as a suit. It stands out as just, it's kind of gross. Isn't that something that an editor worth their salt would have caught and been like, we might need to do a different character or take a different angle in what you're trying to execute right here?
If I hadn't already walked away from the X books, that would have pushed me away. I know that you're going for shock value, you're going for edgy, you're going for, what you think will, get you some press and make the readers go, oh my God, but it has the opposite effect. It has readers go, I'm disgusted with this. What is even happening? Why am I reading these books? And, you get more and more people walking away. But it doesn't seem like they care. It doesn't seem like they'll just put out a new #1 with a bunch of covers, and that'll sell as many copies as they lost in continued readership. And it'll just be another short-term solution to a long-term problem that's eventually going to bite them in the ass.
And it doesn't feel, at least at Marvel, like it's isolated to just the X-Men. You look at like the Avengers line, we see what's happening with Tony Stark, where he's essentially being browbeaten and talked down to by Hellcat, calling him out on his white privilege and stuff like that. And then you go over to Captain America. We haven't had a good Captain America run in 10 years. No one seems to like the character. Like, how do the editors themselves get this stuff through CB Cebulski? Do you think he even knows about these ideas that they're actually doing?
I couldn't even tell you what CB Cebulski is doing. I don't know if he reads the books. It used to be that, your editor-in-chief kind of like looked over everything. Maybe he wasn't involved with, okay, I'm going to contact the writer because I don't like this and things like that. But he would look over everything and just kind of go back to the group editors and say, hey, we need to change this, or this needs to be this way, or this needs to lead into this. It doesn't seem like there's any leadership at Marvel. It just seems like every group editor is kind of their own little kingdom. And unfortunately, they're a bunch of fops who have no idea how to rule. And yeah, so everything is just going to hell.
I'm starting to think it might be bigger than that. I think a lot of these stories are actually originating from the editors themselves. And that's why you get a lot of really bad scripts, because if the writer themselves didn't even come up with a story or whatever it was that they're being pitched to write a story that's kind of already laid out and this is what we want you to do, if that is in fact the case, and it feels like it might actually be the case that a lot of this stuff is actually coming from the editorial staff, like how are you going to turn into a good script for something that you didn't want to write in the first place?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a problem. And if that's happening, then not that can't work if you have a creative editor with a creative vision that understands the characters and like, hey, this would be a cool concept. Now you guys run with it. But you have to have those discussions. You have to sit down with your writers and say, this is the idea. And then everybody has to kind of have input, and you have to kind of like shape it into something that's interesting and that the writers are going to be excited to write. But if the X-Men office is Jordan White coming in with his ideas like Age of X-Man, which was terrible, if that's the caliber of his ideas and he's the one who's handing these things down, that's a problem. Because, you're essentially just handing bad stories to writers, and then the writers are like not interested because there's no investment for them. So they just kind of, all right, this is what I've been paid to do. And, turn in a first draft, and then, it gets approved. And then we're the ones who have to read it if we're still dumb enough to be handing them money.
There's issues over at DC as well. They're literally replacing their entire Justice League. They've been going out on this, like, it feels like a campaign from DC to go out there and replace all their established heroes with these new, better, more, approved versions of heroes that they're going through there. Like, how can they get every one of these ideas wrong?
You would think that something would work just by accident. But, the fact of the matter is they're hiring inexperienced people. They're hiring activists who don't have any stories to tell. They just have an agenda that they want to put out in a very, which, you can do stories that have that in there, but you still have to be telling an interesting story. I think the big problem is you have a lot of writers who are interested in telling, let's say, they're like, well, I'm very interested in telling LGBTQ stories. Okay. You're very interested in that. Do you have anything interesting to say about it? Because that's the problem. Just inserting characters into the world and having that be their personality, that isn't compelling to anybody. That's not compelling to any reader. Even, you're not even seeing like a lot of support for these books from those communities that they're pitching them towards. And it's because the stories aren't interesting. You don't understand character. There's nobody guiding you. There's no editorial that's sitting down with you and saying, okay, but what is the character's personality? What are their goals? What are their dreams? What are their flaws?
It's kind of strange when you think about DC and the amount of change that they've done in such a short span of time. I honestly can't, that these are just, 10 writers working separate from each other, independent of each other, with coming up with all these ideas at the exact same time. It has to come from somewhere. It's not coming from Jim Lee. I don't think he cares about stuff like that. Maybe it's coming from Marie Chavins, but it's likely to be coming from your Ben Abernathy's, your Chris Conroys that are, your more group editor type guys. Why are they allowed to make decisions like this? Shouldn't this be going through the offices back at Warner Media that have so much money invested in these characters going to the big screen and stuff like that?
I don't know. That might actually be worse, because then you're going to go to get a bunch of suits that, come in with their ideas. And those are almost always terrible. Whenever you get people who, they're not fans of this, and the only reason that they're in their position is because they got a certain degree from a university, and now they're in this position, but they don't understand the product. I'll tell you, there's a lot of that in publishing. When you're doing licensed books, you'll be answering to an editor who doesn't care about the properties, doesn't really understand them, just has a book of rules in front of them. They used to work for a gardening magazine that got shut down, or some kind of like fine dining magazine, and they took a publishing job at, say, Disney and or Warner Brothers, and now they have this book of rules, and they just kind of like go through it and give you notes, and they don't understand the property at all. They don't understand the characters. So that might actually be a worse situation.
They can't be the characters any more than the actual writers and editors, can they?
I guess not at the current time. It doesn't seem like I don't know. It could always be worse, I guess. But I think we're getting to the point where we're hitting kind of the rock bottom on a lot of these titles, and we're seeing it reflected in the sales, especially at DC. Just
from an editor's perspective, obviously you haven't worked directly with DC or Marvel Comics. Is there a problem with Editorial Services, with the big two right now?
I think there definitely is. I think that they lost a lot of their experience. They let go of a lot of their experienced editors in the purge, and they promoted a lot of people that were under them. And I think those were all cost-cutting measures. So, you get what you pay for in a lot of, in a lot of situations. So, these are people who aren't making much money. They're probably drastically overworked. They probably have far too many books under them. Like Jordan White, how many X books are there?
There's 16 coming out in June.
Yeah. Do you think that he has time to sit down and read through every, even if he was a good editor, do you think that he has time to sit down and read through 16 scripts and then send them back for revisions and then read those revisions and then look at the pages and make sure that the revisions were done? And, like he doesn't. So he hands it off to a bunch of assistant editors that he has who aren't getting paid anything. Just a bunch of college interns basically that came in and are now assistant editors, and who don't have any knowledge of the properties. You got people who their entire knowledge of the X-Men is that they watched the X-Men cartoon and that they liked The Last Stand, and they're being asked to write a book. That's one thing. If you're like, well, this writer has chops, and I think we can get them up to speed. I'm an editor that will work with them, and I think that I can get a good story out of them. But those editors don't exist at Marvel and DC right now.
If you said, hey, Wes, how do you think you can make this better? And definitely want to hear from you on this one. Was like, well, we need a pay increase. We need to raise the standards of entry into these positions. And if you reward people with their pay and compensation, then people will show up that are better qualified. But they've driven out so many fans and customers at this point, even if you invested money into the editorial staffs. You said, you know what? We're going to raise up the prices or the salaries. We're going to raise up the qualifications. We're going to add more positions and whatnot. They've driven off so many people that I don't think, even if the quality got better, it would take at least a year or two before people would trust them enough to come back.
I think you're definitely right. I think that once you lose that reader, and for the longest time they had the attitude of, well, if you don't like it, don't read it. And people said, okay, and they stopped reading it. They broke the habit. They went on to other things. They spent their money. They're spending their money elsewhere. And to get those people back, like I will never go back to X-Men. Powers House of X and Powers of X or Powers of 10 or whatever, whichever way you read that, was their last chance. And I came in and I read those miniseries and I was like, wow, Hickman's doing some interesting stuff here. I'm in. And then they brought in a lot of sub talents. And Jordan White apparently enjoyed working with those sub talents more than he enjoyed working with Hickman, who actually had a vision and actually had ideas and was actually creative. And Jordan White pushed him to the side so that he could have his little Substack, giggle fest with a bunch of chuckleheads who are not good writers and who he can't turn into good writers because he doesn't have the ability. So at that point, like once I got to that point, I was like, I'm done. I can't ever go back to X-Men, especially once they all became villains. Those characters are all horrible, horrible villains. And there's no redeeming them. There's no coming back. The only way you could have done it is to reveal that they're all plant people and the real X-Men are, being contained under the island somewhere and their memories are being fed off of. And Krakoa's just made these versions that are, the worst impulses of these characters. That's the only way you could even remotely save this Krakoa storyline. And I don't care. Even if you could redeem it, I don't care anymore. So I'm somebody that they can't get back. And if they can't get me back, who is such a lifelong fan of the X-Men, then I know that there's all kinds of other people. I know there's guys like Doc that are still hanging on, but they're few and far between. And then how do you even create the hype? Comics don't know how to market outside of sending a press release to, The Beat? Who reads The Beat? I saw that they were doing like some kind of live stream the other day, and I clicked over. I was like, oh, what's this about? And it was like a writer's workshop or something like that. And there were like 5 people watching. 5. That's crazy. You can talk to actual professionals in the industry, and there were 5 people in there. It's depressing. So yeah, even if they could course correct, there's no way to get that message out to all of the people that they've lost. So I don't know. It just seems, I hate to say it because I love this, I love this medium so much. I love comics so much, but I feel like the industry is circling the drain and it's not ever going to be what it once was. There's no going back, and we kind of have to get used to that idea.
Yeah, it's crazy. It looks like in DC's case, especially, a lot of the people that had the ability to go somewhere else kind of just did it. Like you've seen a lot of their editors and stuff that they didn't fire that have just kind of moved on to greener pastures. And I think it's a really big problem. And I do think in the most cases, the editorial teams right now do more harm than good for the characters in the comic books that are coming out. I do want to say thank you very much to Aaron for joining me. If you would like to be part of the solution to comic books, maybe break in, maybe get one of those spots at DC and Marvel and see if you can make it better. Aaron and I actually had this conversation a couple of years ago about breaking into the comic books. He's got a lot of tips in that. If you're interested in comic books or maybe just want to hear Aaron and myself talk some more, definitely check this video. It's an oldie but goodie.